ನಮಸ್ತೆ ಸ್ನೇಹಿತರೆ. ಆ ಕಿಂಚಿತ್ ವಿಳಂಬಕ್ಕೆ ಕ್ಷಮೆಯನ್ನು ಕೋರುತ್ತಾ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮವನ್ನು ಆರಂಭ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇವೆ. ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ಹಿಸ್ಟೋರಿಯನ್ ಸೊಸೈಟಿ, ಇತಿಹಾಸ ದರ್ಪಣ ಮತ್ತು ಋತುಮಾನ.com ಸಂಯುಕ್ತ ಆಶ್ರಯದಲ್ಲಿ ನಡೀತಾ ಇರತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ಅರಿವಿನ ನೀರಿಗೆ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸ ಸರಣಿಯ 28ನೇ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸಕ್ಕೆ ತಮ್ಗೆಲ್ರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಹಾರ್ದಿಕವಾದ ಸ್ವಾಗತ. ಇವತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಉದ್ದೇಶಿಸಿ ಮಾತನಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಎಂ ಮಾಧವ್ ಪ್ರಸಾದ್ ಅವರು. ಎಂ ಮಾಧವ್ ಪ್ರಸಾದ್ ಅವ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹೆಚ್ಚಿನವರಿಗೆ ಪರಿಚಯ ಇದೆ, ಆದ್ರೂ ಕೂಡ ಔಪಚಾರಿಕವಾಗಿ ಅವರನ್ನ ಕಿರದಾಗಿ ಪರಿಚಯ ಮಾಡಿಸೋ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ನಾನು ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ. ಮಾಧವ್ ಪ್ರಸಾದ್ ಅವರು ಹೈದರಾಬಾದ್ನ ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಫಾರಿನ್ ಲ್ಯಾಂಗ್ವೇಜ್ ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕಲ್ಚರಲ್ ಸ್ಟಡೀಸ್ ನ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಆಗಿ ಕಳೆದ ಒಂದು ದಶಕದಿಂದ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾರ್ಯನಿರ್ವಹಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವರು ಬಹುಶಃ ತಮ್ಮ ಸುಪ್ರಸಿದ್ಧ ಕೃತಿ ಐಡಿಯಾಲಜಿ ಆಫ್ ದಿ ಹಿಂದಿ ಫಿಲ್ಮ್ ಎ ಹಿಸ್ಟೋರಿಕಲ್ ಕನ್ಸ್ಟ್ರಕ್ಷನ್ ಅಂತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಕೃತಿ, ಅದು 1998ರಲ್ಲಿ ಆಕ್ಸ್ಫರ್ಡ್ ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿಯಿಂದ ಪಬ್ಲಿಷ್ ಆಗಿದೆ. ಅದರ ಮೂಲಕ ಬಹುಶಃ ಭಾರತದ ಕಲ್ಚರಲ್ ಸ್ಟಡೀಸ್ ಮತ್ತು ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ಸೈನ್ಸ್, ಹ್ಯುಮ್ಯಾನಿಟೀಸ್ ಮತ್ತು ಫಿಲ್ಮ್ ಸ್ಟಡೀಸ್ ವಲಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಪರಿಚಿತರು. ಇದಲ್ಲದೆ ಮಾಧವ್ ಪ್ರಸಾದ್ ಅವರ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಬಹುಮುಖ್ಯವಾದ ಕೃತಿ ಸಿನಿ ಪಾಲಿಟಿಕ್ಸ್, ಫಿಲ್ಮ್ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಸ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಪಾಲಿಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ಇನ್ ಸೌತ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾ ಎನ್ನುವ ಶೀರ್ಷಿಕೆಯಲ್ಲಿ 2014ರಲ್ಲಿ ಓರಿಯಂಟ್ ಬ್ಲಾಕ್ ಸ್ವಾನ್ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕೇಶನ್ ಅದನ್ನ ಪಬ್ಲಿಷ್ ಮಾಡಿದೆ. ಅದು ಕೂಡ ತುಂಬಾ ಬಹಳ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾದ ಕೃತಿ. ದಕ್ಷಿಣ ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲಿ ವಿಶೇಷವಾಗಿ ತಾರಾ ರಾಜಕಾರಣ, ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಡಮ್ ಪಾಲಿಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ನ ಆಯಾಮ, ಅದರ ಸೋಸಿಯಾಲಜಿಕಲ್ ಮತ್ತು ಹಿಸ್ಟೋರಿಕಲ್ ಡೈಮೆನ್ಷನ್ ಕುರಿತು ಅವರು ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ತುಂಬಾ ಗಂಭೀರವಾಗಿ ಮಾತನಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಸೊ ಎರಡು ಬಹುಮುಖ್ಯವಾದ ಕೃತಿಗಳ ಮೂಲಕ ಸಿನಿಮಾ ಅಧ್ಯಯನ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರದಲ್ಲಿ ಮತ್ತು ಕಲ್ಚರಲ್ ಸ್ಟಡೀಸ್ ನ ಅಧ್ಯಯನ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರದಲ್ಲಿ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಪರಿಚಿತರು ಶ್ರೀ ಮಾಧವ್ ಪ್ರಸಾದ್ ಅವರು. ಅವರ ಬಹುಮುಖ್ಯವಾದ ಆಸಕ್ತಿ ಮತ್ತು ಅಧ್ಯಯನ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರಗಳು ಹೇಗಿದೆ, ಭಾರತೀಯ ಸಮಾಜದಲ್ಲಿ ವಿಶೇಷವಾಗಿ ಭಾರತೀಯ ಸಮಾಜದ ಪಾಲಿಟಿಕ್ಸ್, ಕಲ್ಚರ್ ಮತ್ತು ಪೊಲಿಟಿಕಲ್ ಹಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿಯ ಕುರಿತಾಗಿ ಅವರು ತಮ್ಮ ಕೃತಿಗಳನ್ನ ಮತ್ತು ಅಧ್ಯಯನ ವ್ಯಾಪ್ತಿಯನ್ನ ಹೊಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸದ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ಮಾಧವ್ ಪ್ರಸಾದ್ ಅವರು ಲ್ಯಾಂಗ್ವೇಜ್ ಪಾಲಿಸಿ ಮತ್ತು ಫೆಡರಲಿಸಂ ಇನ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾ ಎನ್ನುವ ಶೀರ್ಷಿಕೆಯ ಕುರಿತು, ಎನ್ನುವ ವಿಷಯದ ಕುರಿತು ಮತ್ತು ಅದರ ಚರಿತ್ರೆ ಮತ್ತು ರಾಜಕಾರಣದ ಕುರಿತು ಅಧ್ಯಯನ ನಡೆಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇದಲ್ಲದೆ ಭಾರತೀಯ ಸಿನಿಮಾದಲ್ಲಿ ವಿಶೇಷವಾಗಿ ನಿಯೋ ಲಿಬರಲಿಸಂನ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಉಂಟಾದ ಭಾರತೀಯ ಸಿನಿಮಾ ಯಾವ ರೀತಿಯ ಒಂದು ಅಸ್ಥೆಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಫಾರ್ಮೇಶನ್ ಅನ್ನ, ಸೌಂದರ್ಯಾತ್ಮಕ ಅನ್ಬಹುದಾದ ಒಂದು ಸ್ಥಿತ್ಯಂತರವನ್ನ ಸಾಧಿಸಿತು ಅಂತಕ್ಕಂಥ ವಿಷಯದ ಮೇಲೆ ಸದ್ಯ ಅಧ್ಯಯನವನ್ನ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸರ್, ನಿಮಗೆ 3 ವೇದಿಕೆಗಳ ಪರವಾಗಿ, ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ಹಿಸ್ಟೋರಿಯನ್ ಸೊಸೈಟಿ, ಇತಿಹಾಸ ದರ್ಪಣ ಮತ್ತು ಋತುಮಾನ್.com ನ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಹಾಗೂ ನೆರೆದಿರತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಪ್ರೀತಿಯ ಆತ್ಮೀಯ ಕೇಳುಗ ಸ್ನೇಹಿತರ ಎಲ್ಲರ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಹಾರ್ದಿಕವಾಗಿ ಸುಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನು ಕೋರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ ಮತ್ತು ತಾವು ತಮ್ಮ ವಿಷಯ ಮಂಡನೆಯನ್ನ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಂತೇಳಿ ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ. ಸ್ವಾಗತ ಸರ್.
ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಪ್ರದೀಪ್. This is a good opportunity for me to share my thoughts with this group of people who belong to this for a new set of people, audience. ಇದು ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಕಡಿಮೆ ನಾನು ಇವತ್ತು ಹೇಳಬೇಕಂತ ಅನಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡಿರೋದು ಈ ನನ್ನ 2ನೇ ಪುಸ್ತಕ ನೀವು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ, ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದಿರುವಂತಹ ರಾಜ್ಕುಮಾರ್ ಬಗೆಗೆ ನನ್ನ ಕೆಲವು ಅನಿಸಿಕೆಗಳನ್ನ ಹಂಚ್ಕೋತೀನಿ ನಿಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ. ಈ ಪುಸ್ತಕದಲ್ಲಿರೋ ವಿಷಯಗಳು ಪರಿಚಯ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಅನ್ಕೋತೇನೆ. ಇದು ಅಷ್ಟು ಅಂದ್ರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಕಲ್ಚರಲ್ ಸ್ಟಡೀಸ್, ಫಿಲ್ಮ್ ಸ್ಟಡೀಸ್ ಫೀಲ್ಡ್ ನಿಂದ ಹೊರಗೆ ಅಷ್ಟೇನು ಇದರ ಸರ್ಕ್ಯುಲೇಷನ್ ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ. ಅದರಿಂದ ನಿಮ್ಗೆಲ್ಲ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲದ ವಿಷಯ ಅಂತ ತಿಳಿದು ನಿಮ್ ಜೊತೆ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಮತ್ತೆ ನನ್ನ ಕೆಲವು ಈ ಪುಸ್ತಕದಲ್ಲಿನ ವಾದಗಳನ್ನು ರಾಜ್ಕುಮಾರ್ ಮತ್ತು ಕರ್ನಾಟಕದ ರಾಜಕೀಯ ಸಂದರ್ಭದ ವಿಷಯ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳಿರೋದನ್ನ ಮತ್ತೆ ಮುಂದೆ ಇರ್ತೇನೆ. ಆಮೇಲೆ ನೀವೇ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳನ್ನ ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಎಷ್ಟು how much time
ಸರ್? 1 ಗಂಟೆ, 1.5 ಗಂಟೆ, 70, 80, 90 ನಿಮಿಷ. ನೀವು ಹೇಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತೀರಿ? ಆರಾಮ್ ಮಾತಾಡ್ಬೋದು ಸರ್, ಆರಾಮ್ ಮಾತಾಡ್ಬೋದು.
ಆಯ್ತು. ಸೊ ಇದು ಕರ್ನಾಟಕದ ಸಾಂಸ್ಕೃತಿಕ ಚರಿತ್ರೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ರಾಜ್ಕುಮಾರ್ ಅವರ ಪಾತ್ರದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಾನು ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಹೇಳಬೇಕಾಗಿಲ್ಲ, ಅದು ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ತಿಳಿದಂತ ವಿಷಯ. ಅದು ತಿಳಿದರೆ ಹೋದವರು ಇಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಬರ್ಲಿಕ್ಕಿಲ್ಲ ಅದನ್ನ ಹೇಳ್ಕೊತೀನಿ. ಆದರೆ ಅದೊಂದು ಏನು ಅಂದ್ರೆ ರಾಜಕೀಯಕ್ಕೆ ಸಂಬಂಧವಿಲ್ಲದಂತ ಏನೋ ಒಂದು ನಡೆದು ಹೋಯ್ತು. ಕೆಲ ಕಾಲ ರಾಜ್ಕುಮಾರ್ ಅಭಿಮಾನಿಗಳು ಮೆರೆದರು, ಆಮೇಲೆ ಅವರು ಹೋದ ಮೇಲೆ ಅದು ಹೋಯ್ತು. ಅಥವಾ ಈ ರೀತಿ ಕೆಲವು ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಇದು ನಿಜವಾದ ರಾಜಕೀಯಕ್ಕೆ ಹೊರತಾದ್ದು ಅನ್ನೋ ಒಂದು ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅದನ್ನ ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳುವಂಥದ್ದಿದೆ. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಈ ಇಡೀ 3 ರಾಜ್ಯಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಆಗಿರುವಂತಹ ಈ ಸಿನಿಮಾ ಮತ್ತು ರಾಜಕಾರಣ, ಈ ಸಿನಿಮಾ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ ಪಾಲಿಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಬರುವಂತದ್ದು ಅಂದ್ರೆ ತಮಿಳುನಾಡು, ಆಂಧ್ರ ಮತ್ತು ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ. ಇದು ಒಂದು ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ಪೊಲಿಟಿಕಲ್ ಸೈಂಟಿಸ್ಟ್ ಏನಂತಾರೆ, ಅವರು ಪೊಲಿಟಿಕಲ್ ಸೈಂಟಿಸ್ಟ್ಗೆ ಇದೊಂಥರ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಮುಜುಗರದ ವಿಷಯ. ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಅವರ ಡಿಸಿಪ್ಲಿನ್ಗೆ ಒಂಥರ ಇದು ಕಿರುಕುಳ ಕೊಡುವಂಥದ್ದು. ಆದಷ್ಟು ಇದನ್ನ ಹೊರಗಿಡಕ್ಕೆ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಪಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಇದನ್ನ ಅವರ ರಾಜಕೀಯ ಪೊಲಿಟಿಕಲ್ ಸೈನ್ಸಿನ ಇದು ಅವರ ಕಾನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಏನಿದೆ ಅವುಗಳನ್ನ ಬಳಸಿ ಇದನ್ನ ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಅವ್ರು ಮಾಡಿಲ್ಲ. ಯಾಕೆಂದ್ರೆ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಇದೊಂಥರ ಇದೇನು ಇದನ್ನ ಹೇಗೆ ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದು ಅಂತ. ನೀವು ಕೆಲವರು ಬರ್ದಿದ್ದಾರೆ essays and books also ಈ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲವಷ್ಟು ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅಮೆರಿಕನ್ ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ಸೈಂಟಿಸ್ಟ್ ಒಂದು 4-5 ಜನ, ರಾಬರ್ಟ್ ಹಾರ್ಗ್ರೀವ್ ಅಂತವರೆಲ್ಲ ಬರ್ದಿರುವಂತ ಚರ್ಚೆ ಮಾಡುವಂತ ವಿಷಯ. ಆದ್ರೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಇದು ಯಾವುದೋ ಒಂಥರದ ಒಂದು ಧಾರ್ಮಿಕ ಒಂದು ಇಂಪೋರ್ಟೇಷನ್ ಅನ್ನೋ ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ, ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಇವರನ್ನ ಜನರು ದೇವರು ಅಂತ ತಿಳಿತಾರೆ, ಅಥವಾ ಅವರು ಸೂಪರ್ ಹ್ಯೂಮನ್ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿಗಳು ಅಂತ ತಿಳಿತಾರೆ. ಆದ್ರಿಂದ ಅವರು ಎಲೆಕ್ಷನ್ಗೆ ನಿಂತಾಗ ಅವರಿಗೆ ವೋಟ್ ಹಾಕಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋ ಆಸೆ ಹುಟ್ಟಿತ್ತು ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ, ಅಥವಾ ಏನೋ ಒಂದು ಈ ರೀತಿಯ ಒಂದು ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಲನೇಷನ್ ಕೊಡುವುದು.
ಸರ್, ದೆಹಲಿ ಮತ್ತು ಹೈದರಾಬಾದ್ ಕೆಲವು ಸ್ನೇಹಿತರು ಇರೋ ಕಾರಣ ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್ ಮಾತಾಡಬಹುದು ಸರ್. ಫೈನ್ ಸರ್, ಯು ಕುಡ್. ಓಕೆ, ಸಾರಿ ಫಾರ್ ದ ಇಂಟರ್ವೆನ್ಷನ್.
ಸೊ ಎಸ್, ಸೊ so the idea is that it's the whole issue of this whole South Indian phenomenon of film stars in politics is treated as is a source of a little somewhat discomfort for most social scientists, especially in the political field. People have written about this phenomenon, but by and large they've kept it in a sort of special enclave, a little room outside, outhouse, keep it political science ದೊಡ್ಡ ಮನೆ, ಈ ಸಿನಿಮಾ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಗಳಿಗೆ ಒಂದು ಚಿಕ್ಕ ಮನೆ ಹೊರಗಡೆ ಹಾಗೆ. That's the sort of thing, a small place, but not willing to engage in a thinking about what it is that might explain this phenomenon. So the explanations have been offered, not that there are no explanations. So two explanations have been offered. One is cinema is a very powerful medium, right? Cinema is a mass medium which is visual, and it has this kind of gigantic sort of images which are thrown at us. So this power of the medium makes people subjects people to the messages from the screen. Right? So the messages from the screen sort of bombard us, and if we are not smart, if we haven't done PhDs, or if we are not highly educated, we are liable to fall for it, to succumb to the powerful massaging, activity of the cinema. That's one explanation. That is, they're so powerful that vulnerable people who don't have built-in resistances, which you get from education and other sources, will fall victim to those messages. They will start believing everything they hear, which is spoken by Rajkumar or MGR or NTR or anybody on the street. Okay, this is one explanation. Second explanation is that people in India are religious-minded, right? And so this one works for instance, somebody like N.T. Ramarao in Andhra, right, in Telugu cinema. People are religious-minded, and when they see a film star acting as a god, as Krishna, as Rama, etc., then they sort of lose sight of the difference between the actor and the role, and assume that they are watching God himself. So in this way, because of some built-in, religiosity, they tend to make heroes out of them, believe in the divine powers of their actors. So these are, to my mind, the two major explanations that have been offered by a variety of social scientists and even film scholars. Like, some film scholars have also done this. They, for instance, that would be roughly the position of someone like Chidananda Dasgupta and so on. So what is it about this explanation? To me, as somebody who grew up watching these films, as somebody who lived through the time, of various developments in Karnataka's, context, in which this film star Rajkumar was a major actor, major participant, a leader in some capacity. It occurred to me that both of these explanations somehow don't take into account the specific moment, the context of these events, and so on. In other words, these explanations which they give can be given at any time in any place, right? That is, people are religious-minded. If you say that, then you can say they are religious-minded in Karnataka, in Andhra, in Bihar, in Uttar Pradesh, in everywhere, isn't it? So, it's like a blanket explanation, which it may even be true. So one should not deny that obviously people are, gullible in that sense. That's the gullible spectator is the center of this theory. And I'm not denying that people are gullible, because if you're illiterate, if you're not well versed in the ways of the world, which you are not unless you have gone through the kind of experiences that give you that knowledge, including education. Obviously, you will be vulnerable. It's not. I mean, we know that poor people in India, the masses in India, are being taken for a ride, cheated, out of their basic rights, out of whatever, cheated out of the hard-earned money by all kinds of con men. There are cheating. The cheating happens sometimes even the connivance of governments, cheating is happening in India. So I am not saying that the common man is very wise and smart, and therefore there's no gullibility. I'm saying there is gullibility, sure. People are gullible. People are being exploited because of their gullibility, and we all know that it's all going on around us. But that's not an explanation for what is happening in this connection between cinema and politics. Because if that were the case, it would happen everywhere, right? It would happen in it should happen in Bihar as much as in Karnataka or Andhra, right? And we know that it does not happen everywhere. It hasn't happened everywhere, right? There have been mythological films made in Hindi, for instance. So it doesn't happen everywhere. And as far as this religious, playing of gods is concerned, we know, for instance, that in Tamil Nadu, MGR was not somebody known for mythological roles, right? He has many historical roles of, Madurai, Veeran and all those kinds of things, but not mythological roles. Secondly, if you look at the repertoire of NTR's films or Rajkumar's films, they have played mythological roles, sure, Krishna and so on, Rama, but they have also played Ravana. So he is or Duryodhana, Bhukailasa in Kannada, same, it was there in. N.T. Ramarao plays many roles in which Duryodhana is also one. Because the whole idea of playing those roles is to show your acting prowess, right? To show that you can do Raudra as much as some other sort of rasa. It's a demonstration of versatility, of a thespian and so on. So you are playing a series of roles, not all of which are edifying, divine in a character, right? And yet that doesn't seem to bother this spectator, unless you think that spectator is ignoring these things and still believing. So you have to ask the question. It is true, obviously, that these roles and these things are having some impact. But what is that impact? Because when you know that your actor, if you think is Rama himself or Krishna himself, the fact that he appears as Ravana should, or Duryodhana, should, make some difference to how you say, oh, I thought he was Rama, but it turned out to be Duryodhana, or something like that. It spoils the illusion, doesn't it? So it's the explanation based on people's religious inclinations and gullibility, etc., is rather weak because of this. For this reason, what I'm saying. The explanation from the other points of view, which is the power of the medium, the ability of the medium to penetrate your own skepticism and somehow convince you against your wishes, even of the messages that emanate from the screen. Now that is, of course, again, you cannot deny the power of the visual medium, the cinema. Absolutely no question of doing that. But there are two things I would say about that. One is what are the messages? So this powerful medium is beaming messages to the people, and they're receiving them, and somehow they're influenced by them. Okay, let us take that as the correct explanation. But in that case, what are these messages? I mean, they should be, messages which somehow contribute to the promotion of this actor as a star, isn't it? As a political leader. But that's not the case. In other words, when you look at it, when you look at these, range of films that they have acted in, they are playing a variety of roles. They're playing the mythological kind of roles, and as I said, within the mythological, they're playing various divine characters as well as characters who are generally treated as bad people, like Duryodhana and Ravana and so on. But they also play modern roles where they promote modern values, modern technology. So there is a film in which Rajkumar is sort of a foreign returned modernizer of the village, right? Similar films have appeared. Or there are films in which they assume extremely conservative positions, where films in which they sort of, Rajkumar, other actors, they teach women the traditional values of being a submissive wife, and those sorts of things. So, if you take the range of messages that come from the screen, you will find that they don't all harmonize into one, thematically unified set of messages. Like they're different. As Rajkumar once said, he was being given an award by the Ramoji Foundation or something like that. He speaks as one of the truly amazing speeches I've ever heard an actor give. I have been trying to find it. If anybody has access to it, I would like to see it again. So, receiving this award, he says, these Abhimani Devaru, the fans, they make you do things. They're like your puppet master. So they say, ಇವತ್ತು James Bond ವೇಷ ಹಾಕೊಂಡ್ರೆ James Bond ಆಗ್ತದೆ. Tomorrow I will be asked to be Shiva. So Shivan Patra. So James Bond to Shiva, a whole range of roles. The messages just don't add up into some coherent political sort of message which you can receive and act upon. So in this way, the whole argument about the impact of the medium being an explanation for the political sort of power that these stars enjoyed, again, turns out to be rather weak. It doesn't hold water, as they say. So, what is the problem then? What is the issue then? What is the alternative to this? So that's where I felt that as a cultural studies scholar with some interest in both of these issues, that is cinema and politics, I said, this is happening in a particular place, that is a region, at a particular time. So in Gramscian political discourse, there is a term called conjuncture, right? A conjuncture is a historical, concept, and understanding how things happen, change happens. A conjuncture is where a set of unrelated or related or unrelated factors happen to come together in such a way that they create some possibilities, right? So, different things, they have to be all available. So, for instance, if you ask, why did the people of Bihar and UP, who are as gullible, in religious terms, as people in the South, why did they not have the same phenomenon? The answer is very clear. They did not have the same cinema. first, so in other words, you have to have cinema industry, right? And second thing is that they were not, they were not as clearly defined as a nationality within the Indian Union as, say, Karnataka is, or Andhra is, or Tamil Nadu is, so right. So in other words, there are a whole set of factors that must come together, that came together. For instance, you can ask somebody, actually I've been asked, so why not Kerala, for instance, or why not West Bengal? Now, again, so there are, various issues to do with that. So combination of things. Why did, how did Kerala cinema feature in the Madras film industry? Because in the initial decades, all these South Indian language industries, which used to be scattered, they would go to Calcutta or Bombay to make films in the earlier days. But then they started concentrating in Madras at the time. So what was the position of the Malayalam film industry there? And you also have the fact that there were attempts in Malayalam also, but very feeble attempts, and there, for which the answers could lie in the history of Kerala. For instance, the communist movement in Kerala, the whole sort of political education through the theatre and other sorts of developments in Kerala, which there could be an explanation. You can suggest possibilities. In other words, what I'm saying is, what is happening here is, one is a nationality which is developing a national consciousness, right? In this particular period, that is one. A film industry which is substantial enough, and already, and is addressing the people of this nationality, right? And of course, the crucial element, to my mind, so it seemed to me that all of these developments are happening in the 50s, around the 50s, which is the time of formal constitution of these places into states of the Union. And as you know, there's a whole history to the whole struggle for this formation of states. In the colonial period, there were a lot of attempts were made by many nationalities in India to get the British to sort of create administrations which are specific to the language regions. Orissa, for instance, Oriya, one of the first to actually gain this kind of thing after a long struggle with the Bengali. Because the Bengalis were saying at that time, Oriya is not a language; it's just a dialect of Bengali. But there was a extended sort of struggle, petitioning, and all of these things, which led to recognition. People in Andhra were doing this. In Karnataka too, there were these developments. But in Karnataka, what you have is, because old Mysore, the Mysore principality is very well entrenched and has the backing of the British powers. The kind of nationalistic sort of awakening which was happening in the neighborhood in the Kerala, in Andhra, in Maharashtra, etc., was somewhat dulled, but it was not absent. In the Bombay Karnataka region, there was a lot of activity around that. But I won't go into. So those developments are very crucial. So in other words, what I'm saying is, those explanations which were given in the beginning, right, by the social scientists, power of the medium, gullibility of the masses. I'm saying both of these are sort of scientific explanations which don't have any historical traction. They don't have historical dimension. What I'm suggesting is that alternative is to treat it as a historical event. And do not rely on the gullibility of the masses, which is a universal phenomenon. Do not rely on the power of the medium, again a universal. But look for historical reasons why something like this happened in this place at this time. That's my first gambit, if you like. That's the thing. Not a sociological explanation, not a psychological explanation or anything, but a historical event. This is a historical event. It happened in this place at this time because a number of factors came together at some point. That is one stage of the argument. Now the other stage of the other part is to trace the history of this. We know that MGR in Tamil, N.T. Ramarao, and Rajkumar in Karnataka. These were the three people who, in their respective linguistic nationality context, were rose to a position of leadership, right? So each of these has a different, there are different factors. Although these three are part of the same phenomenon, in each instance you have to look at a different set of factors which make which will lead to that development. So in the case of MGR, we know that the DMK was the initial sort of home of his activities. So there is a kind of transition. If you look at the history of MGR, there's a transition from being a member of the DMK, being a star campaigner for the DMK, who another, for instance, said, if you have MGR, instead of 1,000 votes, you will get 40,000 votes, something like that. So he was there. So you do politics, he does movies. When you have an election, he'll come, speak, and go, and then you go back to movies. This is what they envisaged as a role for MGR in the DMK party's electoral ventures. But the history is that they, after Madhava's death, there was a break. The rivalry between Karunanidhi and MGR, which is the conflict between them, which is interestingly portrayed in Mani Ratnam's film Irivar. So it led to MGR, I'm summarizing it, leaving and forming his own sort of breakaway party. And of course, this party, after some time, sweeps to power, and MGR remains in power until his death, right? So, for instance, the Sivatambi, this political scientist from Sri Lanka, he talks about it. He says it's like a transition from the message, that is, DMK had a message. The star was going to convey the message to the people, right? So, message was primary. star was an instrument who reached the message to the people. Instead of that, there was a kind of switch, in which the star was the message. So, in other words, it's not the message. So there is a star standing there and giving you a message, and instead of receiving whatever he's saying in his mouth, saying vote for DMK, or whatever, you say, what like this, like there is an expression, shoot the messenger. In this case, it's not the shoot the messenger, but elevate the messenger to the divine status. It's like that. It's a kind of irony that Shivatambi points out. So, in other words, the cinematic sort of appeal of the figure, through these films like Nadodi Mandan and so on, sort of triumphs over the message of the party. So that whole neat sort of separation of roles is hard to maintain. And to go briefly to this to the case of Andhra, N.T. Ramarao. N.T. Ramarao used to have a certain political profile even long before he started politics. He used to organize these cyclone relief, and he used to give statements about his political views. He had, he claimed at that time that he was not averse to socialism, for instance, and so on. Things like that, which were generally indications that he had a certain political understanding and inclination. But as we know, there was a whole history of there was a whole series of events which led to his formation of a party, and within months of formation, an election in which the people of Andhra just voted him to power. Again, the explanation, and Chidanand Dasgupta wrote a book at this point because he found this whole thing very interesting, curious. He basically had this gullibility thesis, etc. Now, the thing about that moment is that it was unlike the first instance, the MGR instance. It was, although, as I said, there was a political kind of aspect to NTR's public persona. It was not absent; it was certainly there, but there was no indication, long before that he would make a move like this. Didn't. It was not like MGR, who already was part of. He had to form his own party for that purpose, right? So, in other words, again, set of circumstances came together to push him into this. And I know there is also a political science kind of explanation, which gives a lot of credit to Narendra Bhaskar Rao, the one who sort of betrayed him, tried to break away from the NTR government to side with the Congress and so on. Of course, it was a sorry episode where he quickly had to. Well, anyway, it was a disaster because the people, rose in rebellion across the state, in support of MGR. ATR. It was one of those moments of popular upsurge. It was spectacular to see. So there is extraordinary kind of following. So again, the message, you could say, if you look at the mythologicals, you could say, well, this godliness, but his messages were not, of that nature. The kind of political things, messages that he had to circulate. He was very much a modern. He had a modern sort of set of values to impart. He never thought that there was any choice in the matter. You know, he actually assumed that being modern is the thing to do. You know, there's no other way. You know, you can see it in the kind of statements that he gave. And he was a very practical, sensible person, at least at that time. Later, you know, he became quite something else. You know, becoming chief minister, you know, I guess does something to you, whatever. So I guess what I'm saying is there is here, even in spite of the kind of persona he had, there is this element of the figure of the star. So they are also in charge. So you don't listen to what he's saying. You look at him and say he is the leader, even though he's saying I'm the leader's messenger, or even though the leader is saying I'm sending you a messenger. Yeah, similarly, in the NTR case, even though you know, whatever his you know, politics may be, it's his image that also is part of it. So this is where cinema operates. Cinematically produced images, right? Now, in the case of Rajkumar too, it is amazingly quite similar. I'll come to why the difference between those two and Rajkumar, which is also important to discuss. But Rajkumar too, you know, had a similar kind of career path, and Rajkumar's moment of you know, participation in politics was the Gokak Chalavali agitation. Right? That was the moment when he jumps into this mass agitation across Karnataka, you know, and goes addresses many public meetings, while refusing to countenance any political career as such, right? This is the difference between those two and Karnataka's hero, which is that he never formed a party nor joined a party, but he played a political role. And on this occasion of the Gokak agitation, which was a mass agitation across Karnataka, and subsequently continued to have a political position, status in Karnataka all the way throughout his life, right? So this here, the political is, you know, we have to understand that when we talk about political, it's not necessary for you to start a party, join a party, and become chief minister or something in order for it to be political, right? It's political even without that moment. But the Gokak agitation was the moment of Rajkumar's entry into this new role in the eyes of the Kannada mass public. Now here, cinema and politics, right? We are dealing with this conjuncture, this coming together. Now here, I want to say another thing. What is the cinematic background of this development? Cinema, film history. Now, one remarkable thing in Indian film history, especially South Indian film history, is the role of the popular theatre in the early development of the cinema. Popular theatre, all these actors, they were theatre actors before they came into whether it's MGR or NTR was not a professional theatre actor like MGR or Rajkumar. Both were professional theatre actors. NTR was more of a modern college dramatics type of theater background, but he was well versed. He was very familiar with company drama or professional drama. So and Telugu cinema has a long history of engagement with the theater, and in fact, a lot of the early actors in all of these things, they come from the theater. Rajkumar's own history, he's acting, Gubbi Company actor, and gets the summons, to go to Madras for an audition. He goes, and Narsimha Raju, Balakrishna, and others are also going with him. Pandri Bai is there, and so on. The theater cinema connection is very important here, actually, because as I said earlier, there is a kind of the thespian, the actor who is capable of a variety, diversity of performances, different types of roles, and so on. This is very important in the life of in the early cinema, which comes directly from theater. To understand the role of theater here. Now, in the transition to cinematic images. Now, for instance, when a play like when a film like Bhukailas is made, it's a theater experience, right? It's a stage play, and all the dramatic sort of capability that you can display in such a play. That's what endears you to the audience. Great actors in the theater are different from what became popular actors in the cinema, in the sense that they continue to show this kind of ability which they displayed in the theater. For instance, a lot of people, we make fun of the fact that all these actors, it's very common. They are 50 years old, 40 years old, and then they wear a wig and they act as college students. Right? This is a standard, almost a cliche of criticism of actors, Indian popular cinema actors. But there's a misrecognition of the intent there. That's what, because the idea is that in the theater, professional company theater type of situation, it's a role. You don the costume and you play a role. It's not supposed to be. You're not supposed to be young to play a youth or whatever, unless your appearance is totally doesn't allow for it. Because the values of the cinema are different from the values of the theater. Because in the theater, the slightly 40, 50-year-old man who puts on the clothes of a youth and a wig and comes as a college student is not violating the sense of appropriateness, right? The sense of credibility, which because the cinematic medium brings this image up close, and it shows, because behind the wig and the paint, you can see the wrinkles, you can see that the person is old, and the cinematic aesthetic somehow doesn't allow for the gap between the performer and the role, in the same way that it's allowed in the theater. Now, this is the transition that people have to make, and the fact that we make this kind of joke about this is indication that this transition took a long time to happen. In other words, cinema was being made with cameras, and films were being made, but the films were imbued with the same spirit of performance that you had in the theater. That is why this dissonance, which you see between the actor and the room, right? And then we laugh at it because we are expecting, some, a cinematic sort of credibility, realism. So what does this mean? In a way, the things that that the theater gives to the cinema is, first of all, the dialogues, all of this. So there is a way in which you have to imagine that an audience that knows these actors as theater actors, or knows actors generally as theater actors, and appreciates certain qualities of the theater actor, the ability to, speak dialogue in a particular way, which carries, great voices. That's the theater. Theater, people admire fantastic voices, which can reel out the long dialogues, like Rajkumar and NTR used to do in his mythological. They used to reel off, breathlessly, a lot of dialogue, that sort of thing. And then in the cinema tradition, you have another component, another contribution from a completely different place, which is the whole tradition of the stunt film. Now, this is in India, Douglas Fairbanks films and all of these films are coming. People are watching them. These are becoming very popular. The Douglas Fairbanks and Errol Flynn, the sword fighting and a lot of intrigues in the story, adventure, etc. So as the cinema began to sort of move away from theatrical performances, theatrical style, and so on, there's also this moment. So in the 50s, one of the things that happens also, if you look at stars, very popular stars, there are actually extremely popular theater stars. They're as popular as any Rajkumar or NTR or whatever, but they're different, right? The nature of their popularity is different. They are known for their big roles, how they played Duryodhana and gave this dialogue, how they played Krishna, how they played some other historical character. They're known for the kind of stage presence that they had, the voice that they had, and so on. The new thing is the face. Suddenly there is a face which is introduced into the mix. The face in close-up. And in those days, in the 50s, if you look at 50s sort of cinema imagery, the paracinematic imagery, which means the images which kind of are used in the cinema halls to introduce stars and so on. There was this, one of the standard formats was this kind of profile, a photo, which was usually shot in studios with carefully made up and, brill-creamed hair and, with there used to be those puff for the men. And of course, lots of different hairstyles for the women, and so on. Just this much, right? Just the face. So this format actually gets introduced in India in the 50s. All these, Rajkumar, NTR, they all start having these kinds of photos, which is a Hollywood kind of invention, is my guess. I'm not quite sure, but I think so. It's the way that they promoted their stars. but it came into prominence here. So there is this kind of moment, if you like, where this whole theatrical culture, which has so far been dominant even in the cinema, is meeting with this new culture of the image, the star image, etc. And something is happening there, some chemical reaction, if you like, between these two, encounter between these two things. So this is my reason for thinking that while mythologicals and historicals like Rajkumar's Mayura and all of those Drapana and all of those kind of films, or N.T. Ramarao's mythological films and so on, they are not unimportant. That is, they are very much important for the popularity that the stars got, right? There's no doubt about it. But it seemed to me that this, mugshot as a publicity sort of instrument, and the kind of relation to the actor that it introduced has some central importance to what happened in the. In other words, while quantitatively the celebrity, how famous are you, how well known are you, how many fans do you have, that kind of quantitative we consider. The celebrity is different from that particular thing which enables your recognition of the star as leader. Right? Because the recognition of the star as leader is not happening during the election time. It's happening right there in the cinema, in and around within the field of film culture. So that's what we need to recognize in order to understand this phenomenon. Right there in the hall, in and around in the spaces of film culture, some new mutation is happening, some kind of qualitative change is happening, which of course rides on the quantitative sort of celebrity that has been gained by acting in historicals or mythologicals or some other thing. But the decisive factor is the star. So what have I introduced? I've introduced the whole, the theater as a phenomenon, and the where the performer is prominent, and the cinema, the kind of demand for credibility, and the cinematic image, etc. And I've introduced to you the swashbuckler, the kind of films, the stunt films, if you like, the sword fighting films, and so on. Now, here is where the combination occurs. The theater actor, see, the theater is where, for instance, in India, this whole in South India especially, this whole birudu, giving titles to thespians, like if you're a great actor, you are given a title, Natasarvabhauma, which is Rajkumar's title. Was not given to him first. It was somebody else had that also. There are titles given. It's a tradition. It's a practice which is ongoing in the theater in those days. And I mean, it's not even just confined to the theater. For instance, when we know that Mahatma, Gandhi was given the title of Mahatma, it was not because it was not a unique event. In those days, such titles were being bestowed on a lot of people. In fact, before Mahatma Gandhi became Mahatma Gandhi, there were others who were also given the same title, Mahatma. And, for instance, the Lokmanya, That's a title. It is not. It's not. It's a title. You call a meeting, you bring people, and you say today we are, saying, bestowing the title of Lokmanya on Balaganga. So it's this title giving kind of activity, which is very specific to the theatre. But interestingly, in the South Indian cinema, it continues so that actors upon getting this because the audiences are sustaining this practice. They're bringing this practice over into the cinematic realm. And so, in other words, something like the theatrical, the community of the theater, which includes actors, everybody and the audience, is also being introduced in the cinema. Then the stunt film brings to this. It's one of the things about this stunt film kind of Douglas Fairbanks, that sort of. There is a kind of narrative in which this a peasant character, for instance, somebody who's poor, but who's a very who's a brave, who can do this stuff, is somehow placed in circumstances where he has to do something to save the princess or to save the kingdom or something, and then he has to face many adventures, in the process. And many have gone before him. It's like a bit like James Bond. Many agents have gone and died. 001 and 002, etc. And then 007 comes along. Like that, many have gone and somehow they got trapped in some bewitching, sort of woman or angel, Apsara's hands, and died, or some demon came and so this person faces a lot of these tribulations, fights, uses the sword with great skill and so on, and then saves the kingdom, or saves the princess or whatever. So this is a kind of narrative form which prevailed in those days. It was a lot of, so for instance, Sudhir Kakar somewhere said that cinema genres are like castes. Mythologicals are for Brahmins, and our mythologicals are Brahmins, and these stunt films are Shudras. That kind of something is said, which is actually, if you translate it, what it means is the mass audiences. For the mass audiences, these swashbuckling films were very important. There was the source of entertainment, much more than maybe some Pandava Vanavasam or something like that. So, in other words, so these things, this conjunction, what I was suggesting in my argument was that there is a kind of merger of this, the mixing of genres. In other words, so the social, cinema. For instance, one anecdote which I have in my book is about, Pandari Bai was a film producer at that time when Rajkumar was just beginning his career. And then she was about to make a film called Raya Rasose, producing. In those days, that's one other interesting thing. There were a lot of women from the theater background who were producers. It was a different sort of time, because women in the theater were extremely independent. They knew the trade, they knew how to run a business and all of those things. So they actually became producers. And there is a story, Kannamba, this Telugu, she's acted in all languages. That there's a story about her. When she was producer, and she would be making, people would be making films. Some director was making films, And then one day she had to tell, call all the crew and everybody together and say, listen to me, you are working for this film. You should listen to what the director says, not what I say. So because everybody was looking up to her, and they were not treating the director with respect. They were thinking, who's the director? Kannada is here. So she herself had to go and say, you better listen to the director, because that's how powerful she was. And so, Pandribai was also one of those kind of figures. There were many such in those days. So she wanted this one person. She wanted Rajkumar for a role in this Raya Society, which is a social film. But she was hesitant. She told somebody, I have a role for this. But, he has this mythological hairstyle, because the people who acted in mythologicals, they kept this hair kind of, because since in the ancient days, their haircuts were different, or they didn't have haircuts or whatever. They had to have some look which isn't, close cropped. So she's told somebody, I am hesitant to ask him because he has that hair, and that won't suit our role. So he said, I'm going to do that role, and he went and got his haircut, and and he appears as a doctor in this film, I was just saying. So this moment of transition, this kind of theater to cinema sort of movement, where he acts in the social, but in time. So if you look at that Raya Society as a social, it's a completely different in its characteristics. First of all, it's modern. It's set in contemporary times, that is, it's people are wearing modern clothes, and it's a middle class family and so on. Whereas what you have in the swashbuckler kind of thing is kingdoms in which Raja is ruling, and this youngster is skillful with the sword, and he sets out on adventure. So the kingdom and modern society, these are the settings, different settings for these films, right? Well, so to sort of cut a long story short, as it were, what I'm suggesting is that in some ways the social, which if you look at Raya Society, it's a very different kind of social, middle class, and entirely to do with who marries whom, what are the obstacles faced by man. And in Rajkumar's role is not a very prominent role. He's just he's like an advisor. He's a doctor. He's a person. The romantic couple is someone else, so the social, in some ways, as you move, one of the things you notice from the 60s onwards is that this social genre continues to be produced more than any other. So social films, however, they have undergone a change. The social genre has undergone a change. And this change is that there is a character at the center of it, the hero. Now, where did this hero come from? The social genre did not have a hero of that kind. They had, major, like, another film I mentioned and discuss in my, is the Schoolmaster, B.R. Pantulu's. He acted. Rajkumar is not there in it. It's a social, it's a real, quintessential social of those times. There is a romantic couple also in it. Remember the romantic couples who go and dance and all that. But the whole thing is, Pantulu, there's this kind of elderly figure whose children are, ungrateful and so on. This is the whole story. And then, there is, this film was remade in Hindi, in many, Badi Pantulu in Telugu, and so on. The point is that social doesn't have scope for this idea of hero. There's no hero in those socials. There are characters with different, good and evil and all of those, nice people, good people, advisors, people who are vulnerable, people who are aggrieved, and all of those things. But it doesn't have a hero figure. What you see as the cinema progresses to towards kind of independent status, is that the social acquires this hero figure. The hero figure used to be there in those adventure films, right? So something happens whereby the social is imbued with the spirit of the adventure film in the form of a hero, right? And this, in a way, it brings the thematic elements of those films, stunt films, into the modern sphere, into the contemporary, scenario, and it's a creation of a particular type of film in which both the pleasures of the action film, stunt film, etc., and the setting of a middle class or whatever class contemporary social context, both given. And then there is one more thing. So let's see. So one more thing I need to bring in order to explain this to you. One more thing is that the other kind of social also remains. That is the social without this sort of dashing adventurous hero. And then when you notice how the film industries are organized, what you notice is that there are, in that period, there would be two major male heroes, male actors, male stars, like a pair. This is very clear in the case of Tamil and Telugu, but also it was there in Kannada too. MGR, Shivaji, NTR, Nageshwar Rao, Rajkumar, Kalyan Kumar, for instance. In the Kannada case, one of the difficulties is it was a smaller industry compared to those two, and therefore this division, of labor isn't as clearly established as it is in those. But there you can see that if it comes to sword fighting and all that, it's NTR or MGR. If it comes to theatrical thespian sort of demonstration of ability, it is Shivaji Ganeshan. And a similar kind of ascription of meanings was there for a period of time between Rajkumar and Kalyan Kumar. So what does this mean? This means that there is a continuation of the social in a different form. The social itself becomes divided. So actually, it is also at this time that the stunt films also stop being produced. There's no longer much. So the social sort of becomes a battleground where these two type of things. So typically a film in which say Nageshwar Rao or Kalyan Kumar acts will not have the same kind of fisticuffs and action, etc., which Rajkumar film or an NTR or MGR film will have. There is also, if you look at what people were writing in the press at that time, because that's an indication of how people were receiving these things and what meaning they made. One of the things they do is they say these other bunch of actors like Shivaji, Kalyan Kumar, Nageshwara, they are more culturally authentic actors. That is, they actually represent what Kannada culture is, what Tamil culture is, or what Telugu culture is. Whereas these others, they because of the action and the stunts and the fights and other things involved, and the mass audience and so on, they somehow don't represent culture. So representing culture authentically, so in other words, there's a class divide which follows as a result. One is cultural authenticity and a kind of middle class audience, which appreciates, it's always appreciating the good, like what a great actor, Abhinay is so great, then even though they won't say it, because in the press, you don't find too many people, openly declaring that these people are bad actors, but they imply it. They say, things. These are not actors. These are actors. So the mass audience and its actors, who are not actors according to this other one, and the more middle class or educated audience with its good actors and who make good films and so on. So this division is also established. So political representation happens in that social which incorporates the stunt film thematics and sort of characters, the hero. Those are what you call romances. Those kinds of films. They're based on the romances. The romances are stories, adventure stories, which actually in the history of novel, the novel comes after the romance in the European history of the novel, and it sort of replaces the novel. And actually, the novel is associated with the middle class kind of world, whereas the romance is much more sort of adventure. I mean, middle class was the readership, but the world was different. And in a way, in this moment also, when people say this is more authentic culturally and so on, there is also the other association with the novel there, whereas here it's not so prominent. I mean, there are always exceptions. I'm not saying that it's a neat. There's nothing neat about it. For instance, people, everybody acts in with different types of films, but the overall impression is that. Now, so all of this as a way of saying that it is the social imbued with romance elements, which is the precondition for the kind of effects, for the kind of political representation processes that developed in these three states. So in other words, what is the political sort of recognition that these actors earned, and how did it translate into political power in some cases, and why not in some other cases, right? That is in the case of Rajkumar, as you know, as I was saying, it's not. Now I want to come to the consequences. I want to sort of say a little bit about the issues that I've raised in my title as a way of concluding this. Now, what I've said is this kind of impasse of competing nationalisms, and the question of identity, national identity, etc. Let me explain. So, because what I'm suggesting is this kind of development has to do with an unfulfilled desire for national recognition. Nationalities struggling for recognition. There is a nationality which feels that it is deprived of its rightful place in the world. Now, so by competing nationalisms or competitive nationalisms, what I mean is that in India we have sort of rival claims to nation status. All right, rival claims to nation status. This is around two fronts. One front is up there, between some secular nationalism and some Hindu nationalism or Muslim nationalism. That's one. That's what unfolded in the colonial times, and it led to the formation of Pakistan, and we all know that, and the establishment of India as a secular republic, and the rise of Hindu nationalism subsequently. Right. This is one. So there you can see competing nationalisms of one kind, but there's another, which is more structurally significant, which is that within this established sort of republic, the union called India, there is a competition between Indian nationalism and these nationalisms. That is the Kannada, Tamil, Malayalam, Bengali, Maharashtra, Gujarati, Orissa, etc. Tamil. So this has been a structural feature of India ever since independence. We know the history of it. For instance, in the all the way, up to as long as Gandhi was alive, all the way up to independence, it was accepted in the Congress that when India becomes independent, states based on language would be formed, and a federal structure would be established. But we also know that afterwards, this was denied in the name of integrity, in the name of a threat to the nation from outside forces and so on. Now, this, the history of it in the 50s, which is what what happens is there's a struggle. There is a demand for unity. There's a demand for the recognition of these unities, the language-based nationalities, and there is this whole moment on a Potti Sriramulu in the Telugu context, undertaking a fast unto death, and so forcing Nehru's hand, and so the linguistic national sort of status, which was taken for granted before independence and was going to be recognized formally after independence, suddenly it became something which was reluctantly given under pressure, under duress by this government, the central government, right? This was the whole situation of the 50s, but reluctantly, saying, okay, hands are tied. So they felt as if somebody was blackmailing, somebody was forcing them to do something against their will. Whereas in the whole period of national movement, and Gandhi was assuring that this is how it's going to be. Every nation within the union is going to have independent, autonomy within the whole. When you see films from the 50s in Kannada, for instance, not just say Ranadhira Kantiro, this film which was made in the wake of this formation in 56 of Karnataka, you'll see that suddenly the films are addressing the Kannadigas as a collective. ಗೆಳೆಯ ಕನ್ನಡಿಗರೇ ಸ್ವಾಗತವು ನಿಮಗೆ. That's how the Ranadhira Kantiro opens. It actually addresses the spectator, saying, suddenly, you have new identity. And there are many films, not just say historical action films like Ranadhira Kantiro, but even socials. The new identity is now become a marketing sort of tool. So cinema is being marketed now, Kannada film for the Kannadigas, in a way that never happened in the earlier period, because all films, were studio films. They didn't. This aspect was not highlighted. That if you are watching a Kannada film, you are a Kannadiga belonging to Karnataka. That element was not there. It becomes a prominent feature after this formation of the state. So what I'm pointing to is this competing nationalisms is one of the design faults of the Indian Union, if you like. Because you shouldn't have a situation where it's like what I'm reminded of most is the Yayati story. One grows old, the other is young. So when the older person says, "I want to be young," again, the younger person suffers, isn't it? So in that sense, when the center claims, says, "I am the nation," then the nations within the nation, they suffer and they feel neglected, they feel suppressed or ignored or whatever. So this has been an unfortunate structural problem of the Indian Union ever since independence. And one of the suggestions I make here in this book is that these kinds of developments are actually a way of finding expression for otherwise politically suppressed national longings. If you can, I hope that is clear, that there were national longings which remained unexpressed, which could not be expressed, given the way that the Union was, had retained the dominance of the center against the promises. Therefore, there's it was a kind of virtual expression. So in other words, the argument I'm making is electoral participation, starting a party, this is not important for what I describe in this book as cine politics. Cine politics is that which happens without that reference. That may come later. It may come. That's not where the cine politics is. Cine politics is right there in the way that this particular actor is elevated to the position of some kind of supreme political authority. You might remember, some of you at least, that I think it was S.M. Krishna who, when he became chief minister, one of the first things he did was to go to get blessings from Rajkumar, visit him and so on. So it's a position which. So what is this? What is this position? It's the uncrowned king. That's the position, I would think. It's like the monarchic sort of dimension, which sort of experiences a revival in the context of the absence of national self-expression in the modern sense. So in a way, I've used the expression here of kings of democracy. These are democratic situations, but there is some element of kingliness, of monarchist element, which necessarily enters, because unless the structures enable you to participate, to feel that you are recognized, you can't have non-monarchic sort of democratic types of representation, because the tendency in the Indian Union has been to try and, as far as possible, to treat the states as purely administrative units, not political national units. No, they go on trying to beat back any attempt at national self-expression. And it's a repressive unification that we have experienced, which is unfortunate, because actually only the center can, and the center must encourage the flowering of the nationalities, the maturing of nationalities, so that people cease to be nationalistic. That is, the only way one ceases to be nationalistic is by experiencing that kind of recognition that national identities receive. When it is not forthcoming, and when it is there is an attempt to silence the need for expression, can turn violent or disruptive, etc. That's also happening in Karnataka and many other places, right? So this is, I think, yeah, I've taken enough of your time. This is the meaning of that title. That is, competing nationalisms is a kind of a design anomaly in the Indian Union. It should be removed. It has to be removed. There should be recognition of nationalities and autonomy within a federal setup, so that there is the possibility of democratic flourishing. Because without a common language, and this comes to this book is also in a way based on what my perceptions about language, and I'm pursuing that. Continue to pursue that. A common language is an absolute essential. There's no example in the world where there is a democracy which doesn't have a common language. There's no such thing. And that common language is the language of the majority. Now, in India, there's no such majority, right? The only way that you can have democracy is to establish the autonomous administrative political existence of the nationalities of India, so that they can, within their boundaries, democracy can flourish. Because then participation of the majority of people is ensured by the fact of a common language, which they already have, right? They have Kannada, these people have Telugu, these people have Tamil, whatever, Marathi. When they have that, and that is the fundamental requirement for democratic functioning, why deny that? That's the problem. And I feel cinepolitics is all about somehow trying to work, sort of, because of the repressive politics of central national parties, people are finding other ways of expressing their national longings, and so it's basically an argument. What I make in this book is an argument about a historical event, by saying that this actually, it's an event, first of all, and it's an event which must be understood in the context of the anomalies of Indian Union formation, which can be corrected easily. And, which can lead to the, you know, more democracy, better democracy, and a larger, wider net for the, instead of democracy sort of being restricted to just the voting, people, you know, more participation can be ensured if the lesson of cinepolitics is heeded. That's my argument. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Madhav Prasad, for a great lecture. Now the floor is open for Q&A. If anybody have question, please unmute yourself and introduce and have question, make question. There is a question by Ramesh. Abuse question, but he missed the first part of the talk, and his question is like this: is Hindu nationalism then a competing nationalism that needs to be allowed a flowering, or is this only for linguistic nationalism?
Yeah, I think, as I said, it's there are two levels at which this is going on. And Hindu nationalism and whatever, Congress nationalism and Muslim League nationalism, these are part of the colonial sort of history, right? And the thing about those is that they are the basis on which the country is divided into national and regional, national and non-national, you know, and that kind of things, which should not be the case. You know, you can, if it's one, then, you know. So no, I'm not saying that those should be, because there's no language. I was saying language is an essential for democratic functioning, and therefore these are the, you know, it's the nationalities that should be allowed greater sort of. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
So yeah, competing nationalisms in this, the encompassing and the encompassed, the embedded. Yeah. I have actually written a paper on a short sort of note on this difference between national party and regional party. You know, why it is an illegitimate distinction. It should not exist, and why the existence of national parties and this whole thing is one of the signs of the undemocratic character of India, that we have still not been able to put behind colonial structures and actually, you know, create a structure which is good for all of us together. So I feel a center should be everybody's center, you know. The unfortunate thing in a colonial context is the center becomes established first, and then it takes over the administration. Whereas in a not properly independent situation, the people, you know, the component parts should come together and say, let's have a center for ourselves, right? This has never happened, which is why the existence of national parties is part of the legacy of colonialism. And it's a sign of unfreedom. You know, it's a sign that we have not really achieved freedom in the real sense from colonial rule. That's my reading.
Friends, please unmute yourself and ask question if anybody have question.
Madhava, this Tarkeshwar.
Uh,
Linguistic nationalism is also a colonial legacy, isn't it?
Linguistic nationalism is well, you can think about it as a colonial legacy, or you can think, in the sense that in the early 20th century, and well, the period may differ, maybe a little earlier for some, a little later for some. But what you see, if you look at that moment, and what the historians of modern India don't discuss, at all, almost. They mention it in passing, but they're not interested in it. And but it's one of those, blacked out parts of Indian history. Is that in that period that was the period of the awakening of this national consciousness among the nationalities of India. Now, why did it happen? Did it happen as a result of colonial facilitation, or did it happen as a result of some other process? So there was, you could say there's a combination of factors. One is the major factor, as far as one can gather from historical sort of works, is the Bengal partition. So it's an actual opposition in the movement to oppose the Bengal partition, that the nationality consciousness, there is a precipitation of nationality consciousness. There's a kind of spread of that sentiment across. So it's first of all an oppositional kind of moment, and also that's when subsequently you'll see that various institutions are established by the intelligentsia in various parts in Kannada, Andhra, everywhere, to sort of assert national consciousness. And it is accompanied by a lot of discussion of the theories of democracy, the theories of equality, and all of those things also. So, and of course, there is an appeal to the colonial government to enable this recognition, to sort of respond to this national awakening by reorganizing the administration according to language and so on. So there is but it's not, I would say it's not facilitated, it's not, it doesn't have any, it doesn't draw any legacy from the colonial. They left nothing for this movement, whereas they left the Anglophone state administration structure, which the national, the center sort of occupied and continues to occupy. So in that sense, I think, they both have a history which begins in the colonial period, but I don't think the legacy they received was of equal value. I think the colonial, the ICS received a bonus, in the form of the Anglophone state structure, and that has been they've thrived on that. Okay.
Okay.
Any?
Yeah.
If there are no other questions,
Yeah,
let me
please,
come in again.
Tarkesh. Please, Tarkesh, sir. Please.
In the post-Rajkumar scenario,
Ah,
and the kind of centralizing forces that are in operation right now in Indian electoral politics,
ah.
how do we imagine this linguistic nationalism today?
Well, it's hard to say, but I have some thoughts on it, which are very, kind of scattered and tentative. What I have said, I mean, I've written it somewhere in some places. What I would say is, as long as the Indian state practiced this whatever mixed economy model, where we're supposed to be socialistic and hence capitalism was kept, restrained. The restraints on capital, the state bureaucracy sort of license Raj, and we know the history of that. There was, there was the lot of the languages and the linguistic nationalities was diminishing. Now, a few things have happened since then which have reversed the trend, I feel. One is technology, obviously, the digital. Secondly, capitalism, full-scale capitalism. Let's say this. I think there's one more, but while I think about it, and now what has happened as a result is there has been a kind of renewed vigor to the vernaculars in India. They have things to do. As they never used to have anything to do in the older economic sort of structure. Suddenly these languages have things to do because there are people who cannot communicate except in those languages. It's not because they are. In the old days, it's like if you're educated, if you know anything at all, you know English or you know some other Hindi. That's not the case anymore. You find people who are extremely competent in various technical and other fields, but they don't, and they also earn. They're very, well off, reasonably at least, but they don't have this, they can only circulate, communicate in their languages. This is becoming more and more of a phenomenon, I feel. And also, global capitalism, which doesn't have the hang-ups, the prejudices and so on.
Kunji,
Indian capitalism.
what are you doing with the
capitalism is one of the revolutionary forces of modern history, modern world history. So if you look at countries across the world which have actually made a significant shift to a modern sensibility, they have done so either by capitalist penetration or by communist violence or repression, force. China, for instance. Now in India, we have sort of, kept both at bay for a long time, but now it's, I think, the advent of capitalism is one of the, I'm not trying to state the violence, the evils of capitalism. But capitalism has always been a kind of contradictory phenomenon. It's both a liberator as well as a exploiter. It's from the beginning that's been the lot. And unfortunately, in India, we did not have that history until now. And today, we are the world is in a neoliberal movement, whereas for us, capitalism is still functioning like it used to function for feudal societies in Europe some other time. This is because of the suppression, the limits placed on capitalist development in the name of socialism. If it was socialism, it would have been okay, but it wasn't, as we know. So that's what I'm saying is the languages are coming into their own, in the sense that more and more, the use of these languages. I think there's statistics to prove this. There are reports. I can't cite them now. There's been an explosion in the use. Already there was one phase when the print medium, there was an explosion of print medium, in the vernaculars. Now with the digital, it's expanding further, and more of the market is operating with the vernacular languages. And so there is I guess what I'm saying is the conditions for linguistic national awakening, for political autonomy, exist, but they exist on the ground without it becoming converted into a political consciousness. And I guess it will only happen with more prosperity, and improved economies and so on, rather than in the current situation where there is a kind of upsurge of Indian nationalism in a new guise, in a context where the nationalities were sort of beginning to see themselves as autonomous units. So I think there is to my mind, in the future, it's only going to become there has to be a certain amount of, there's a certain number of the experience of injustice, or the experience of discrimination, etc., which is happening all around us, but it's not converted into political consciousness. That's my sense.
So there is a question by Victor Vaz. He's teaching English literature in Bangalore. Why religious nationalism has greater appeal than the linguistic nationalism?
I don't think, personally, I don't think it has greater appeal. It is, what can you say? No, if you look at the history of Bangladesh, it's hard to say whether, which one appealed more to them. We had a student from Bangladesh who was actually working on this whole problem. Is Bangladesh as identity primarily Muslim or primarily Bengali? And if you look at the reasons why they broke away from Pakistan, actually it was they were breaking away from a religious unity because they wanted to assert their Bengali identity, right? So in that sense, it's not. Of course, in the present moment, today, we are we are facing the dominant status, where we're looking at the dominant status of religious nationalism. But those, again, that has to be understood in the context of that other competition which I mentioned. That's another and why how that got resolved. See, it never got resolved is question. That this whole because essentially the competition between this Hindu nationalism and Muslim nationalism and this other secular nationalism of the Congress, etc. These the Hindu-Muslim sort of conflict, which is at the base of these formations, is basically a North Indian phenomenon. And the resolution, because there was no resolution for those things except this formation of Pakistan and other things, which doesn't quite resolve this. And what is to be noted about these two, the Congress BJP Indian national models that they have, is they're mutually incompatible. That is, they cannot live under one roof. See, in democracy, as we saw in America, democracy means that there are two or more opposing voices which agree to oppose each other under a set of norms which both agree, isn't it? That's what democracy means. Parliamentary democracy means that you'll say we won't fight each other for America, dominance. We will fight each other in a non-violent way within America. We will, take turns to rule or whatever, according to the will of the people. Now, if you look at these Indian national conceptions that we have at the national level, they have, for instance, the slogan, Congress Mukt Bharat. What does it mean? It means you can't live with them. Although, if you look at this, there are some people, below the, higher political level. There are some people who still think that India can, have a two-party democracy in which BJP and Congress will be the two parties. But actually, the visions, cannot tolerate the existence. Each one cannot tolerate the existence of the other because it just doesn't work. So that's your impasse there. That's your logjam. That's the unresolvable contradiction at the top. So this vacillation between one and the other is, what is it? Is it really because Hindu nationalism is so popular, religious nationalism is popular? Or is it because in the relation between center and states, the states have see, for instance, as long as Congress was dominant, people were happy, to ally with BJP for electoral purposes. Everybody has done it. DMK has done it. Anna DMK has done it. People, Karnataka parties have done it. Telugu Desam has done it. Everybody does it. They ally with BJP. But today, the situation is turned. So my feeling is, this Hindu nationalist dominance at this moment, it may have some amount of it may have to do with the popularity of the party in the Hindu sort of Hindu manifesto or in some parts of the country. But it also has a lot to do with the dynamics of this enormous, anomalously designed Indian Union between center and states. That anomaly is also partly responsible for it, because they, the time of Congress has now, moved to the time of Hindutva of BJP. So, that dynamic has to be taken into consideration, because people, the regional players, they don't want to, they don't think too much about ideologies. They think, who is at the center and who do I want? How do I prevent this dominant party at the center from encroaching on my thing? That's a calculation, and that calculation has led to a lot of these compromises. Every party has done it. BJP has been supported by CPM in a way, so yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Professor Madhav Prasad.
Right, thank you.
ಸುಮಾರು 2 ಗಂಟೆಗಳ ಕಾಲ ನಮ್ಮ ನಡುವೆ 90 ನಿಮಿಷದ ಪ್ರೆಸೆಂಟೇಶನ್ ಮತ್ತು ಸರಿಸುಮಾರು 30 ನಿಮಿಷಗಳ ಕಾಲ ಸಂವಾದಕ್ಕೆ ತೆರ್ಕೊಂಡು ಬಹುಶಃ ಕನ್ನಡ ಸಿನಿಮಾ ಅಧ್ಯಯನದ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಬಹುಮುಖ್ಯವಾದ ಮಂಡನೆ. ಸರಿಸುಮಾರು 15 ವರ್ಷದ ಹಿಂದೆ ಮಾಧವ್ ಪ್ರಸಾದ್ ಅವರು ಜರ್ನಲ್ ಆಫ್ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ಸ್ಟಡೀಸ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಮೊದಲು ಈ ಪ್ರಬಂಧವನ್ನ ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಸಂಬಂಧ ಪ್ರಬಂಧವನ್ನ ಪಬ್ಲಿಷ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. ಮತ್ತು ತುಂಬಾ ಡಿಸಿಸಿವ್ ಆದ, ತುಂಬಾ ನಿರ್ಣಾಯಕವಾದ ಪ್ರಬಂಧ ಕನ್ನಡದ ಸಿನಿಮಾ ಅಧ್ಯಯನದ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ. ಸೊ ಅದರ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಅಪ್ಡೇಷನ್ ಅನ್ನ ಅಥವಾ ಸುಧಾರಿತ ಪರಿಷ್ಕೃತ ಆವೃತ್ತಿಯನ್ನು ನಮ್ಮ ನಡುವೆ ಒಂದು ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಆದ ಆರ್ಗ್ಯುಮೆಂಟ್ ಆಗಿ ಮಂಡಿಸಿದ ಮಾಧವ್ ಪ್ರಸಾದ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ಹಿಸ್ಟೋರಿಯನ್ ಸೊಸೈಟಿ ಮತ್ತು ಅದನ್ನು ಪ್ರತಿನಿಧಿಸುವ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಎಸ್.ಕೆ. ಅರುಣಿ ಹಾಗೂ ಇತಿಹಾಸ ದರ್ಪಣ ಮತ್ತು ಅದರ ಸಂಪಾದಕರಾಗಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಎಚ್.ಜಿ. ರಾಜೇಶ್ ಮತ್ತು ಋತುಮಾನ.com ಮತ್ತು ಅದನ್ನು ಪ್ರತಿನಿಧಿಸ್ತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ನಿತೇಶ್ ಕುಂಟಾಡಿ ಮತ್ತು ತಂಡ ಮತ್ತು ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮದ ಅವಿಭಾಜ್ಯ ಅಂಗ ಆಗಿರತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕೇಳುಗ ಸ್ನೇಹಿತರು ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಎಲ್ಲರ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಮಾಧವ್ ಪ್ರಸಾದ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ ನಾನು ಅನಂತ ಕೃತಜ್ಞತೆಗಳನ್ನ ಸಲ್ಲಿಸುತ್ತಿದ್ದೇನೆ. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ವೆರಿ ಮಚ್ ಸರ್.
Thank you, Pradeep, and all the associations and the institutions for inviting me to be part of this series of talks. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. ಸ್ನೇಹಿತರೆ ಗಮನಿಸಿ, ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಸೆಷನ್ January 31st ಟಿಪ್ಪು ವಿಮೆನ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನುವ ಟಾಪಿಕ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಜೆನಿಫರ್ ಹೌಸ್, ಲಂಡನ್ ನ್ಯಾಷನಲ್ ಆರ್ಕಿವ್ಸ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡುವ ಜೆನಿಫರ್ ಹೌಸ್ ಅವರು ಟಿಪ್ಪು ವಿಮೆನ್ಸ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಮಾತನಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಆದ್ರೆ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಕೂಡ ಭಾಗವಹಿಸಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಶುಭ ಆದಿತ್ಯ ಅವರ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ವಿಶ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಸೆಷನ್ ಅನ್ನ ಮುಗಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಸರ್. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಎವ್ರಿಬಡಿ.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.